This is the Mobile Tech Podcast, brought to you by worldpodcasts.com. Now here's your host, Tech Girl, Miriam Joie.
Brought to you by Mint Mobile. Stay tuned for a special offer at the end of the show. Hi, and welcome to the Mobile Tech Podcast. I'm your host, Miriam Joie, and today is February 15th, 2024, and I've got the excellent Tim Stevens here to talk with me about EVs. Hi, Tim.
Hi, Miriam. It's been way too long since we've done this.
How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm all right.
Awesome.
We're here together in the same room, which will make this a lot of fun.
I know. That's very serendipitous. It all worked out really well. So, we haven't done an EV episode in a while together, and a lot of stuff has happened. And I know that we've done a few car episodes with the audience. I've had Chris Davies on a couple of times, but I think we haven't really talked about the state of EVs. Where are we going? What are we observing? And there's a lot of stuff going on right now.
Yeah,
right?
It's a really interesting time right now because there's just a little bit of trepidation from a lot of people, and we're seeing a massive increase in negative response to EVs in general. And it's just things are cooling off just a little bit. So everyone's freaking out, which is kind of bothering me because this isn't a startup. This is
this is real.
Yeah.
So what's your take on that? Actually, let's talk about this negative news perception.
Yeah.
Do you think it's fabricated? Do you think we're not talking about conspiracy theories on this podcast, obviously, but
we'll talk about aliens later.
Yeah. I can't help but feel that perhaps, there is a kind of a movement to kind of quell the EV hype.
There is.
But does it naturally happen as a backlash to, the kind of, government intervention trying to give us some incentives to go EV and pushing those mandates? Or do you think it's just artificially created by some, big evil corp somewhere?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little hard to blame it on big oil, I think, but it is a little weird. I've pondered this question myself quite a bit, and it is strange because it does seem like there's some degree of organization behind it.
Right? It feels like it's happening.
But I think by and large, it is people who are just anti-change, and particularly anti-environmentalism. And I think that there's such a correlation in many people's minds of EV must be eco-friendly, and therefore I hate anything that's eco-friendly, therefore I hate EVs. I really do think that's the organic bulk of the negative vitriol that we see is thanks to that.
But why do you think people are anti-environmental or EV? I mean, you'd think that after the climate crisis we're observing, even if you're skeptical about climate change, you'd be maybe, it wouldn't hurt that we, generate energy through the sun and wind and you put it in our cars instead of burning.
I have never understood why conservative voters cannot get behind environmentalism, if only to make a lot of money off of people who are willing to pay too much for quote unquote environmental stuff. I mean, if you are someone who is a traditional, free market, free business, let companies do whatever they want to do kind of person, isn't it a great opportunity for these companies to make environmental friendly stuff? Even if you're laughing all the way to the bank because you think it's fake, this is a huge opportunity. People are willing to spend tons of money on environmental stuff. So why not capitalize on that, even if you think it's dumb? But no, there's so much vitriol against this stuff. It really, really boggles my mind.
Obviously, I try to kind of ignore all that because I'm covering EVs, so I'm just gonna have to write about it no matter what happens. And I don't really feel like writing about, how EVs might not be a thing because I don't believe in that. I do really, truly believe that inevitably, for better or for worse, as a car enthusiast, I have some qualms here because you and I both love a gas car with a stick shift.
Yeah.
Something lightweight, something, engaging, something analog that, has a kind of a delayed reaction a bit. It's all very, very compelling, but to me, the more I think about it, the more I look at where the industry is going, the more I look at what technology is doing and what's happening with that, the more I'm thinking that's nostalgia at this point, I feel like eventually, yes, you might keep your MR2 or whatever. I might keep some kind of convertible two-door sports car with a stick in my garage, but we'll be driving it on weekends on the few roads that we can still drive it on, and maybe eventually on the track.
Yeah.
Right? 10 years from now, maybe.
I think probably longer than 10 years. But
it's going to take a while.
But yeah, for sure. No one is taking anyone's cars away from them at this point. But I think, having lived with an EV as a personal vehicle for years now, it's just such a nice experience to get into. If I need to go to the store and get a gallon of milk or whatever, it's so much more peaceful. It's so much more calm. And it's really hard to explain that to someone who hasn't lived with an EV. how much more calming it is just to get into an EV, to push a button and drive away silently with no internal combustion going on.
No vibrations.
Yeah.
And everything is so easy, like acceleration, deceleration. And then with the low center of gravity, everything handles better. Now you have more weight to contend with, and that sometimes does come into play.
Sure.
You feel it. But most companies have figured that out too now.
Right. Like you said, I have an MR2. It's a very loud car. I have an old Subaru as well, also a very loud car. I love driving those things. It's a lot of fun. But if I've got to commute to work and it's going to be a boring commute, or if I got to go to the airport at 3 a.m., which is what I had to do this morning, I would much rather be in a quiet, calm EV with new technology, with everything else. And also, I would much rather maintain a new EV than having to do all the oil changes I have to do in all my cars, transmission fluid flushes, all that stuff. All that goes out the window. You don't have to worry about anything else.
Yeah. And so here's some topics I want to kind of like run by you. So one of them is actually, we're kind of heading there with this conversation already. And that's how do you explain, other than, somehow talking them into getting behind the wheel of an EV for more than a test drive?
Yeah.
To the average person that drives a RAV4 CRV every day, how much better of an experience is to drive an EV? And then conversely, or simultaneously to that, how do you explain to somebody that in that EV space, you have cars that are very kind of conservative, traditional in their user experience. And then you have like spaceships like Teslas, right? And you run the whole gamut. And like, if you, like me, you're used to the spaceship, like I have to convince people who like EVs that, the spaceship has its merits.
Yeah.
It doesn't always.
Yeah.
Not everything is good in
Not
the
for
spaceship.
everybody, yeah.
But I'm just saying, like, to me, like, that's, I think, part of the problem is like, I can't pick a single EV that represents all EVs.
Right. And I think that's kind of the beauty of our free market capitalist society, is that there are a variety of choices. And I think that's one of the things that a lot of these anti-EV people latch onto, is the idea that everything is going to be the same. And that's not the case at all. We see such a desperate selection. Like the Volvo EX30 is a really interesting, fresh design that feels like really nothing else on the road, which is exciting. But then you can drive in things that are like, the Toyota BRZ4, stuff like that, which are much more traditional
Busy
feeling.
forks.
Busy forks, yes. It feels much more like a normal, everyday kind of car. And so, if you want the wild experience of the Tesla where everything is through the touchscreen, great, you can get that. Or if you want something with actual buttons and knobs and dials, you can get something else. And so that selection is important. And no one's jamming anyone to go into one car.
But at the same time, I drive a Tesla all the time. Well, not very often, actually, because I have pressed cars and I travel a lot. So actually, realistically, I don't drive my car that much. But I have done a lot of road trips and city driving in my car over the years. It's my second Model 3. It's almost 6 years of Model 3 for me, right? And so what I'm finding is, like, I drove the EV9 at the Kia Press event like a couple of weeks back. And then I had it as a loaner this past week in San Francisco. And I love that car. It's great, but there's so many controls in there that to me now feel vestigial. Like, do I need a light switch? I don't. Like, to me, all I would really like, which Tesla doesn't do, but I think could be done, is a single push button that brings up the menu for the lights. Like, that's, or maybe when I flash the lights, which actually what Tesla does, then you get the button. Or like on Teslas, when you push the stalk on the left, if you still have stalks, we could talk about that. Like, it brings up the wiper menu. Like, to me, that's all I need for those controls, because not only because I'm used to it, because I feel also like the windshield wipers on Tesla, the auto work does not work. It's like, because they're using vision and it's not working.
Yeah. And if you
but assuming it was working, like, do you actually need to change this often? Do you need controls for that on the stalk all the time? Habit, yes. But once you live without it, like, power button, that annoyed me so much on the EV9. There's a why do I need a power button?
You have to remember that the EV9 is very much Kia's entry transition flavor of EV. This is an SUV for people who are coming from the Telluride or Palisade or something like that. And this is probably going to be a lot of people's first SUV. And so you want to make that transition relatively easy.
So let's talk about that, because we're jumping from topics, but it's actually flowing really well. So I've just wrote a story that I filed yesterday with Lance over at Tech Radar, where I write every 2 weeks about trends and kind of opinions about EVs and where we're going, and try to educate people on these things. And I compared basically I said, I didn't say it that way because I think it wouldn't be approved by the editor, but I feel like the EV9 and the Rivian R1S to some extent are the gateway drug to the EV for Americans.
100%.
I mean, short of going pickup truck, right, which isn't really panned out so well so far yet because the prices are a little too high. But at $55,000 for a rear-wheel drive short-range model, the EV9 really delivers a lot of value.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
And then even if you go to $63,000, which is the first all-wheel drive tier with a bigger battery, you're 15 or 14 and a bit K from a Rivian R1S base model, and you're pretty much getting 80% of that experience, short of going off-road.
Plus a lot more practicality, I think,
right?
for families.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I feel like you're right. You're touching on something that, on one hand, yeah, the EV9 should probably have all these controls because it's trying to get people to win people over.
Right.
But I'm imagining another scenario, which is like, I jumped from gas to, you know, from really analog gas. Some cars I had at the time did not have ABS even, you know, to a Tesla.
Mm-hmm.
And I was fine. Like, was I fine because I'm an ex or current tech journalist like you? Or was I fine because I'm a nerd?
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like most people adapt really well. So the question is, instead, why do we need that intermediate step? Do we really need that intermediate step?
I think we do, especially as we're talking about the cynics that we kind of led off with. I think a lot of those folks are going to take any opportunity to say, oh, I don't like this. And so if you can drop down those barriers of entry, if you can make it easier for people to get in the car and to just figure out how to drive it without having to learn something new, you know, the traditional shifter that we don't really need anymore, even going from a traditional shifter to a push button, that throws a lot of people off.
Yeah.
Now, for us, we don't even want the push button necessarily anymore. But I definitely think it's important, especially as we're talking about these, you know, I think putting them as the gateway drugs is a really, really apt way of putting it. Make that as easy as possible, lower the barrier of entry as much as possible, make it familiar, and then ultimately we can start to move people into more aggressive, more progressive things.
And so, you know, talking about the EV9 again, amazing car for the money, amazing value, amazing package. I am not an SUV person. I'm not a truck person, even though I learned from driving the R1T for a day that, holy crap, I want that vehicle. It's like the Swiss Army knife of EVs.
Yeah, you get a lot of bad ideas from that thing.
It's like, today I'm going to be a Lamborghini and I'm going to go to the track and lower the suspension and be an idiot on the track. Today I'm going to go to Home Depot and pick up some mulch. Today I'm going to carry the whole family on a long road trip because I've got the large battery pack or whatever, the max battery pack, and I got 400 miles of range. And today I'm going to just drive and commute like I would in a Corolla. It does it all, and it does it all really well. Now, it's expensive, but wow, that car blew my mind and really made me kind of rethink about the preconceived notions I had about, you know, vehicles that I wasn't very fond of. And I did that again. The redux of that was the EV9, because I'm like, I don't need a three-row SUV. I would argue a lot of people don't need a three-row SUV.
Yeah, absolutely.
A lot of people want a three-row SUV for whatever reason. But I feel like I drove this car and I was like, I get it. Like and this is why I think this article I wrote is about, like, you know, this is a good thing because it's going to encourage people who are on the fence, but just need that extra nudge. Like, they can't complain anymore. That thing will do anything short of a pickup. Like, there's so much cargo capacity in that thing. You can go to Home Depot and fill it up.
Yeah, it's definitely a great solution for people with large families who want an EV, and there really haven't been any options out there, especially nothing that as attainable as that can be. So I think it's a great option. I think they'll sell a ton of them. I hope they'll sell a ton of them.
And they have a great platform. The EGMP platform is really rock solid. It's been proven now.
Yeah.
It's one of the best out there. They're not fully software-defined vehicles, these cars yet, but Kia told me, because I asked that question during the Q&A, that this is the most upgradable in terms of OTA, over the air. Because not all modules are, but most, which is more than any other car they've ever made, including the EV6 prior.
Nice.
So interesting.
Yeah.
But, you know, back to software-defined vehicles now, since we're talking about that, and maybe back to pushing it too far, which I feel Tesla's doing with the removal of the stocks, and has kind of gone back with the yoke, right? Like even the Cybertruck has a kind of squarish steering wheel, which kind of makes sense with steer-by-wire. Maybe I haven't driven it.
I haven't either.
But the point is that at least you can do this, right? If you like, not that you ever will, because it doesn't have that kind of range of, you know, it's only one turn, lock to lock, right? So I feel like, you know, they've come back on some things, which is good, because the yoke on the S and the X is the stupidest. I'm sorry. If you like your Model S with a yoke, good, but no. right? No,
absolutely not.
Like you wrote about that. I remember you had a big rant about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there are definitely safety concerns, and the fact that ultimately that they slap that on there without optimizing the steering rack, like you need to do really. A lot of people were upset that at CNET at the time, we said that the Tesla yoke was dangerous and that the Lexus yoke was good. But people didn't take the time to actually read the differences between the two, and Lexus put a lot of effort into theirs, whereas Tesla just basically cut the top and bottom off the steering wheel. So anyway, that's kind of old news at this point, and I do hope that it is better in Cybertruck. I hope to get the sample at some point.
But it's not old news, because if you look at the new Model 3, the Highland that just came on sale like this last week or two, which I think is a brilliant update, because having owned the Model 3, there are some things that are lacking. It's interesting. Like, this is my opinion. The Model 3 is essentially a Honda Civic. That's electric. That's how I think of it. Probably in some areas worse, but in some areas better. But it's not like to me, it's not trying to be a luxury product. I think people see it as a luxury product because the Tesla brand, was expensive to start with. Like, even 3 years ago when I got my second one, people are like, whoa, you have a Tesla, that's expensive. I'm like my Tesla was really cheap, actually, comparatively speaking. Like, I feel like there is this preconceived notion. So people cross shop it with the 3 Series and the A4 and the C-Class. But I don't think that's what you should be cross shopping.
Yeah, I very much disagree with anyone who says that pretty much any Tesla is a luxury vehicle. I don't think that it has the chance. Any of their vehicles, all the way to the top.
Even premium is arguable, right? But here's the thing. I do think that the Highland is a better product in that sense. I think it might finally be a premium product. But then they did the thing of removing the stocks. And by removing the stocks, you remove the drive selector and you remove the turn signal, which I cannot believe they did that. Like, it's like, to me, that's where, like, it's basically yoke version 2. Like, they didn't really learn.
Yeah, it's almost like the hardware department hasn't gotten the message that their cars don't drive themselves yet, so they just keep pulling controls out as if the cars can drive themselves. You don't need to do it yourself.
The engineers want the stocks, but I think it's
somebody.
It's Elmo up there on his throne, like, and it drives me nuts because I have a feeling that if I jumped into a Highland, other than that learning curve initially of like, oh, you have to use a touchscreen for gear selection, you have to use the buttons on steering wheel for turn signals, I'd be annoyed for a while. I'm sure I'd get used to it. But I have a feeling it would probably be my next car, simply because supercharging network, the tech, and now it's better built and better finished and better materials, and it's quieter and it has a better suspension tuning, all the things. And it's interesting because it feels like Tesla listens to their customers, but then they throw these curveballs. And sometimes it's fine. Like, as I said, like, there's vestigial controls I can live without, but sometimes it's not. Like, turn signal stocks have to stay.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I draw the line. Get off my lawn. Like, I'm too old for this. No. I don't know about you, but that's to me.
Yeah, I just got out of a Lamborghini that didn't have a turn signal stock, and I was fine with it. But it's also a Lamborghini, and they designed the steering wheel to look like a racing steering wheel.
And it's also left and right for the turns, right? Like Ferrari does.
Yeah.
So you're probably more intuitive than up and down on one side.
Yeah. I just feel like there's not enough perception of what a normal person wants in a car. And exactly, there's a bit of egotism that's happening there. And the same thing that happened with the Model X, with the doors.
Oh my God.
Very clearly.
So let's
and the entire Cybertruck.
I know this is good because I had this conversation with a car journalist recently. I feel like vanity projects, right? Model X.
Yep.
My least favorite Tesla to date. Cybertruck, total vanity, project. But the tech, I wrote an article about this. The tech in the Cybertruck is incredible. And it's gonna push the envelope forward for all car makers. Maybe not the steer-by-wire, because I think it's going to take, like, in the same way as the electric power steering took a while to finesse, maybe Porsche will come along and make it work like they did with EPS. But I feel like the 48-volt system, the networking architecture, like a lot of that stuff, gigacasting in general, not just Cybertruck, but like in the Model Y and what Toyota's doing or going to be doing, and what the Chinese makers are doing, that's not going away. And
no, gigacasting in particular is not, but you have to remember Tesla didn't invent
No,
gigacasting.
I know.
Yeah, so
I think what I'm just saying is that, like, the Cybertruck is a vanity project, but I do feel that, unlike the Model X, it did develop new technologies that I think are going to trickle down to potentially a $25K, priced car.
Yeah,
if they can pull it off. Meanwhile, Tesla's turning into an energy company. Even if they fail at making cars completely tomorrow, what's your take on that? The whole switch, like, I feel conflicted. I'm like, this crazy man now can charge every EV, and people will want to charge every EV at his station.
Yeah, I have so many questions about how that's actually going to work. We got some questions recently with
Jim Farley.
Jim Farley, thank you. Got my CEOs confused at Ford there. Jim Farley at Ford saying that everyone with an eligible Ford, whatever that means, probably anything that's sold in the last 12 months, something like that.
I think Mach-E and F-150.
Probably so.
Right now it's pretty.
And so that's good. I mean, I think we all assumed it was going to be free anyway, but we still don't know details about, how is the charging setup going to work? What's the maximum speed? Farley made some responses on Twitter, but he basically said yes to everyone. Like, will it do this? He basically said, yes, it'll do this. And there were some places where he said yes to two things that were kind of conflicting. So I'm very curious about what speeds are going to be, what the customer experience is going to like. Will everybody have to sign up to the Tesla app in order to be able to charge their F-150 Lightning? Probably. I think we both expect that.
So
at least I do.
I have a different view on this. I think what's going to happen is I think Tesla's going to expose some APIs for other car makers to connect to their back end, to benefit from all the routing powers, to benefit from, what's available, the pricing, things like the door codes on the cafe at the I-5 stop at Kettleman Station. There's a coffee shop there run by Tesla. And the only way you can get to use the bathroom in this little coffee shop that they have is by looking at your screen at the code that they display for that location. And they also have Starlink Wi-Fi in a lot of these large, this has 96 stalls. So in these large locations. So it's really highly integrated. If you're driving up with an F-150 and you can't use the bathroom, you're going to be pretty pissed, right? So I think they're going to need to integrate that stuff. And ideally, that's what I'd like to see. It's literally plug and charge. You plug and it charges your Ford Pass via the back end of Tesla.
That's what we want to see for sure.
But will that happen?
I don't think it
will.
Yeah.
And honestly, installing the Tesla app, it's a minor thing. Like the Europeans do it all the time right now. I don't know if you've charged on a supercharger in Europe.
No, but I certainly have about a dozen different charging network apps on my phone right now. So it's not, another one is not the end of the world.
My Tesla app worked. It's amazing.
Interesting.
Yeah.
But what I would love to see would be the supercharger network spinoff as a separate company. I think it's time for that. And honestly, I think because so long as it is so closely tied to Tesla, then Teslas are always going to have an advantage when it comes to that user experience that you're talking about.
Yeah.
And they have no incentive to really make that better for everybody else. Sure, they'll open it up and they can get a lot of good PR about how open they're being. But it sounds like you're going to be kind of a second state citizen when it comes to using the systems, and that's what I'm afraid. You won't have top tier speeds. You'll have a cable
so that's
too short
that's
for your
more
car.
of a technical limitation right now, like the top tier speed. But I think there is no technical limitation to fully integrating with the Tesla backend. The question is which manufacturers are going to do it and how. And we've been at briefings where we ask questions like at CS, right? And the answers were damning. Like I was like, OMG, why are you not taking this seriously? And that's what I'm concerned about. So I'm actually glad that Ford is taking it seriously. At least they're trying. Maybe they don't have all the answers, but they're trying.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about this extensively online, and I have been pretty skeptical about the short-term ramifications of NACS. I think it's going to cause confusion in the market, and I think there's going to be a lot of situations where people are going to pull up on their Lightnings and the cable's not going to reach or it's not going to work, whatever else. But I do think in the long term it will be positive to have everybody on a new platform. I just hope that they can hurry up and get stuff like bidirectionality, 800 volts, the missing pieces that are really important to certain manufacturers. I think those need to be put in place before this is really going to be kind of a seamless transition, plus all the API stuff we've been talking about too.
Yeah, so I'm hoping that at least a half or so of the companies somehow managed to integrate with Tesla's APIs, if that's indeed even an option.
Yeah. I
would be really surprised if Tesla didn't let them do that, because Tesla also needs to know availability, right? And for the rest of the network to work seamlessly. So I think it would make sense. But then the other thing is, your Ford F-150 Lightning or your Mach-E is not going to charge at the 250 kilowatts that I systematically get at the peak of the curve on my Model 3. Ever.
Yeah.
Even if they could do 250, because I think there are enough, limitations there in the hardware on the cars because remember, superchargers cheat, right? That they actually use underrated cables on purpose because they replace them often. And it works because the cable's shorter, cheaper to make and lighter, and it's a better experience. And it's not dangerous because they have the specs, the car is spec for it, the cabinet spec for it. But, Kyle Connor covered all of that. It's like kind of fascinating how, Tesla's like, yeah, the EE engineering says this, electrical engineering, but we have some wiggle room and we're going to not go for like the worst case, but like we're going to tune it down because overall in scale, it makes more sense to replace the cables often than to make like the German engineering approach. We will make the most bulletproof cable possible. Yeah. Like, no. And that's why we end up with Electrify America, fire hose type cables.
Yeah.
So it's interesting.
It is, yeah.
And I don't know how that's probably why I think the Fords will derate the charge speed. Because they'll be like, whoa, I'm seeing too much heat on the port or too much, too much current going through here. Like, let's slow it down.
I think the Lightning's only 130 kilowatts anyway. Isn't it something pretty mediocre
That's the problem.
like that?
They're all pretty bad.
Yeah.
Like there's a few outliers, EGMP from Kia Hyundai Motor Group and Genesis. There is Taycan, of course, and Lucid when done properly. But overall, like Rivian does a pretty good job, I think. They have pretty high speeds. But this is the thing that brings us to another topic, right? And again, we're skirting the software-defined vehicles talk conversation. Is like, here's how I feel. I feel like Tesla, Rivian, Lucid, the three startups, even though Tesla is not a startup, but I still call them because, compared to like Mercedes has been around for 100 plus years, they're startups, right? The startups seem to be doing it right in terms of tech in general, not just like the infotainment, the OTA, the software-defined vehicle stuff, but even like just like the, integration, vertical integration, like Apple style, right? And then of course, like, charging speed, battery tech, motor tech. And then you've got, I feel like Koreans that are really kind of of the traditional car makers are really getting it, and then you have Chinese. And the Chinese are totally doing it right.
Yeah.
Probably because they're just copying Tesla, which is fine. But because they have such a large, EV fleets now out there in China, and they have all these, government help for, subsidies and stuff.
And they've also made a quantum leap forward. I mean, Chinese cars have been around for a long time, obviously, but in terms of making cars eligible or really desirable in a global standpoint, China's only been really doing that for a handful of years. And so they've made a huge leap forward. And that means they can kind of start fresh and do whatever they want to.
That's what I'm saying. And they're doing it. They're seem to not be encumbered like the Western traditional car makers with their legacy, because a lot of these companies have been making kind of crappy gas cars for a while, right? And so all of a sudden they were like, oh, we can clean sheet this stuff. Great, let's do it. And then they did it right by copying Tesla, or, realizing that SDVs, software-defined vehicles, are the way to go. Look, I don't understand why we're on second and third generation EVs from traditional car makers and they're still not software-defined vehicles fully. Like, I understand there's a supply chain thing going on here with suppliers and needing to adapt, and then you need to own the firmware inside and out. Like, that's why during COVID, Tesla was like, oh, we can't buy this microcontroller for the seat controls. Well, we'll take another microcontroller and reprogram the code on that, and then we'll have a plan B. No normal car maker can do that because the supplier black boxes their seat controller. Right.
I feel like BMW is the company that I think from the traditional standpoint is really doing strong stuff when it comes to that. Both their next gen cars, their Neue Klasse, and also the Heart of Joy that's in that thing. That car is designed to be completely BMW software from soup to nuts, the entire thing, which is great. But we're also seeing them do impressive stuff with OS 9 updates and what they can do to the car there. They had some really cool demos at CES this year, like the large language model voice assistant, which would be great. So, for example, this past week, we have an iX, was trying to drive it home, really bad snow. I wanted to turn the regen down to nothing, and I couldn't find it in the menu how to do it. And so I tried asking, hey, BMW, how do I turn down brake regen? And BMW didn't know what I was asking for because they call it brake recuperation. Of
course.
I had to ask for the brake recuperation, then it popped right up.
Yeah, you just triggered everybody's iX.
Oh, my goodness. I'm sorry about that if you're driving.
The 5 of you who are driving an iX.
My apologies. But the cool thing about this large language model thing is I could literally say, hey, BMW, I need to turn down the thing that increases the amount of how my car slows down when I lift off the gas pedal. And it will say, do you mean brake recuperation? And I say, what is brake recuperation? Anyway, then it can explain to me what it is.
Oh, cool.
And that's actually pretty neat. It turns these voice assistants into something that is actually useful, because right now you need to know the exact terminology that whatever product planner came up with to call this thing. And that's coming via software update this summer for free, which is cool.
Oh, cool.
And then the other thing they showed off was this remote parking demo where you can get out of your car, hit a button on the BMW app, and walk away, and somebody remotely teleports into your car using telepresence and drives your car and parks it for you. And that also is something coming via software update, which I think is, and that's a genuinely useful thing. It's like a valet driver who's not a 14-year-old kid who's going to take your car for a joyride.
Maybe they are.
Right, but they are. But they can only go 8 miles an hour, so they're not going to go on a very fast joyride. But that, again, I think is a genuinely useful, tangible opportunity for software-defined vehicles. And that's, again, something that's available on a car today, which I think is pretty cool. Or not available today, but coming to a car that is available today.
I didn't know you had an iX.
I have an iX, yes. That was what we replaced our Model Y with.
Okay,
yep.
Cool. So, I feel like, I think to me, this is one of the things I'm really excited about the Chinese EVs that we're not getting, partially because they're forbidden fruit, because Europe is starting to get them, although I don't know how long that's going to last, because they're freaking out over there.
Yep.
But I also feel like, Polestar, Volvo, Lotus, those are brands that are owned by Geely, Geely, whatever you say. I never know how you say it. And they are coming to the West, to the US, because, those are established brands. And, the Polestar today, the 2 is a great car, but it's 5 years old, essentially, more than that in terms of architecture. And it's still pretty solid. The BS2 edition is, wow, I don't know if you had a chance to drive it.
They definitely know how to tune the suspension.
Oh my God. I just lost my mind. I was ready to trade in my Model 3 when I drove that thing. And then Reason took over, because I'm like, this platform, no. But I think Polestar 4 I'm really excited about, because that would fit me to a T. Like it's more like a car. I know what they call it, an SUV or a CUV, but it's more like a car. And it's essentially a Zeekr, and they're really cool cars. And, the Polestar 3 to me feels more like an EX90 without 3 rows,
Right. Yeah,
and
absolutely.
that's not what I'm looking for. Like, I want something really sporty. So I want them to do, like, if I'm in the market for an electric car again, and I want to avoid the shenanigans of the Elmo, I will probably go for Polestar 4 at this point. That's cool, because I feel like I cannot give up the software-defined vehicle life, that very vertically integrated. The fact that Polestar sells a phone in China because they bought Meizu. Geely bought Meizu, the phone maker, and they're making a Polestar phone. I cannot wait to get my hands on that, even though it'll not work in the US or whatever, just to try it out with a Polestar car. Because this is that I wrote about this vertical integration, like how Xiaomi made a car, how Huawei's made cars, how, Polestar's making a phone. And NIO has a phone. We haven't figured out who makes that yet, but it's super high end as well. And so this is only in China. But to me, like, this vertical integration is also what defines software-defined vehicles. But it's really works well in China because everybody's got their own ecosystem. Xiaomi has essentially the equivalent of iCloud and all these features that we have on iPhones, right? But in their own ecosystem. So of course their car and their phones and their TVs and all that stuff is going to work seamlessly as one, right? But we don't really have that because we have Apple and we have Samsung, or and Apple and Android here. So this brings me to the other very controversial topic that I've written about and I'm very vocal about, is that I have a very strong hatred for CarPlay and Android Auto.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Because I've lived the Tesla life and haven't really missed Android Auto and CarPlay, frankly. And, I totally understand the merits of jumping into a rental car and having the exact same experience I just had in my CR-V or RAV4. But I don't drive a CR-V or RAV4. I drive a software-defined vehicle with a very narrow, very polished ecosystem. And my phone is just an accessory to that, but it actually works. I don't really need more. Like, my music services are on the infotainment system. My Tesla can see my calendar, my text messages, my call stack. I'm good. Like, do I need to do, Discord on my cars? No. But that's me. Some people want to do Discord.
Well, 50% of people in a recent survey said that they would not buy a car without Android Auto.
I know, and GM has stirred quite a stir.
yes.
I wrote about that.
Yeah, absolutely.
But
yeah.
to me, they're a crutch. So my problem is not that Apple and Android should be not part of your car.
Yeah.
My problem is that it's a projection. When you have an Apple ecosystem, like if you're an Apple person, you have the watch, you have the phone, you have the iPad, you have the Mac, you have the speakers, whatever. You're that person. You don't project your phone to your iPad screen. You log into your iPad. What we need, and this is why I'm excited about a lot of the Android Automotive version 2 that we're starting to see some companies adopt. We need to be Apple needs to let us log into a Mercedes with my Apple ID and get my entire Apple universe over there.
But they're not going to do that.
But what if they did it in a virtual machine? It'd be still better than projection because you could optimize it. Because it would run independently of your phone. Your phone wouldn't have to be connected.
But you would only be able to do that for one or the other. You would not have an Apple ecosystem running within Android Automotive, I don't think.
Which virtual, the only way, I've been thinking about this because as in China, it's easy, vertical ecosystem. You log in with a Xiaomi ID, you're in a Xiaomi car, you're good to go. But here, I imagine a world where it's all driven by Android Automotive, ultimately. We know it's going there, right? For the West.
Yep.
Even Polestar is going to use Android Automotive here, not whatever stack they're using in Geely, and Zeekr, right? So spin up a virtual iPad. And let it run on the car and have an app on the iPad that talks to the car.
But Apple won't even let people build like third-party Macs anymore.
But this would require Apple.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And maybe CarPlay version 2 is going there, but I don't feel like CarPlay version 2. As soon as I saw the Porsche illustration without the tachometer in the middle, I was mad. I know EVs don't have a tachometer, but even the Taycan, there is a power meter, whatever you want to call it. No, anyway, the point is it's in the middle.
Right.
And Apple cannot take that away from us. And I'm old school about that. I feel like the brand identity matters, and I think Apple can own the infotainment screen, but I think and you should have access to the data of the car, but I think that owning the cockpit screen, the actual binnacle, I think is going too far.
I just don't think that Apple will ever let that happen. And so given that, I think the best we're going to get from Apple will be this Porsche stuff where you're able to take elements of CarPlay and pull that out. So it's no longer projection in that case.
No, it's not.
It's a different sort of thing where you're basically pulling elements of CarPlay into the UI, but you still need your phone.
And that's the problem.
I think you will always need your phone because Apple's never going to
So here's the future I'm imagining 5 years from now. All of us on Android, the few of us that are left because Apple is eating the world in North America, are going to be native Android, logging in with our Gmail account, and everything will just carry over. Our phones will not be needed, but our phones will obviously talk to our device.
That'd be great, but I mean, when's the last time?
But CarPlay will exist for projection for
Probably
those suckers, the millions of you who have an Apple ecosystem, including myself, because I'm recording on an iPhone here and a MacBook, even though I'm an Android user as primary. Although this is a Galaxy S24 Ultra recording the video. Hi, Patreons, by the way. If you are listening to us and you're like, why are you talking about video? There's a video version of the podcast you can get in advance through my Patreon. So check that out. Patreon.com/TankGirl. That's Patreon.com/TNKGRL. So yeah, that's kind of, I'm not happy with I feel it's the wrong solution to project the phone.
It is a crutch, but ultimately I think from a developer perspective, it's far preferable to the old solution, which was having to write your app 15 different times.
No, I agree. That's not a solution.
And I don't think that it's reasonable to expect that Apple will ever allow it.
And this is why Android Automotive is the end game, because the Android app exists.
The problem with Android Automotive is that it's been a long time since we've seen any major app get released on Android Automotive.
Because Google.
And there's still a tiny fraction of the number of apps available on Android Automotive that are available on Android Auto, which is why even if I can do an Android Automotive car, I'm mad because I cannot use Android Auto in Android.
But that's why, you mean, when I talk about Android Automotive version 2, what I think what Geely's actually doing is it's not Android Automotive. The core of it is, but they're letting you basically run your apps. And I don't know how they're going to gatekeep people doing Discord while they're driving, but there's going to be a solution, I'm sure, for that.
Yeah,
maybe they'll disable text input or something. I don't know, but you can. I mean, if you own the kernel, which is open source, so you can tweak it, you can potentially, when the car is in drive, disable all video or disable all text input for certain apps.
Yeah.
And I would prefer that. And that's kind of what I'm envisioning. Android, like Google is either going to abandon the existing like Polestar Android Automotive that we have in Polestar 2, or because it's typical Google, or forget about it. But it doesn't mean that we could take Android and make our own Android Automotive. And that's kind of what I think about when I think of Android Automotive 2.0.
Yeah, that'd be nice. I don't think they will open it up and make it easy to run your apps in there, because there are a lot of certifications that you have to go through to get your app approved into Android Auto or Apple CarPlay in terms of
that was only to
control sizing.
Please the car makers.
No, it's to
the
please
Chinese don't
the U.S.
care.
government. It's to please the
Really?
U.S. government. Yes, absolutely.
So it's the NHTSA and these guys?
Yes, there's a
NHTSA, you're ruining the party for us.
volume this thick of how big your
really,
inputs can be, where they can be used.
Like,
and
I have not been affected by the Tesla NHTSA recall because I'm a reasonable human being and I use my autopilot in a responsible way. And FSD is stupid. Do not buy it.
seconded.
Like, I'm sorry. Like, I'm just saying, I'm a Tesla fangirl up to a point. Okay. My point though is that I think, if you look at this recall they did, it didn't affect me because I'm a reasonable human. And thankfully, it's hopefully going to bring a lot of people back to reason. But at the same time, it does annoy me and it does worry me because there are some circumstances in which I'm like, okay, this is a little too much. And I'm worried that people are never going to be able to experience how cool it can be, this technology. Like, I think we need the guardrails, but I don't think we need to implement them the way we implement. I wish there was a better way to do it. And I think technology can solve that somehow. But it's not done right now, right? Like Tesla's in-car camera at night, like I noticed I can stare at the ceiling and I can look at Theo. And because it can't see me because the quality of the camera is not good enough.
Yeah, absolutely. I tested Tesla versus BMW versus Mercedes-Benz versus Super Cruise and Blue Cruise, and the Tesla in-car camera didn't care what I did. I could look at the floor.
But now it nags you in the daytime.
Oh no! This was after that.
For me, it started nagging me when I wasn't paying attention at the road. So it's definitely working. But my point is, it's very janky.
Yeah,
like lots of Tesla things.
Many.
And but I also feel like NHTSA, like is I feel like we need regulation, but we have to be careful not to step on innovation. And I feel like there are some things that you can only do in the real world.
Yeah,
you can't simulate millions of cars driving millions of random roads in the world and feed the neural networks of the machine learning algorithm without unleashing real cars out there that run the algorithms.
I would argue you could do a hell of a lot better job than Tesla has done.
Oh, for sure. But I'm just saying, like, NHTSA, I feel like the government, the regulators are like, no, you cannot. And I'm like, no, guys, this is the only way we're going to be able to get there. And are we getting there? I don't even know if we're getting there. Do we need to get there? I don't even know if we need to get there. I'm actually very conflicted about that. At the same time, I live in a city where Waymo operates, and it's amazing. Every time I get in a Waymo car, because I do it so rarely, because I always have press cars or something, it's like 3 months have gone by, and it's better. Just like when I first got autopilot in my first Model 3, where every 3 months, it was a radical improvement. When I first got autopilot, it drove like a drunken toddler, and I was scared for my life. And now it's like, it's pretty rugged, like it's pretty reliable. It works really well, as long as you do what you're supposed to do, pilot monitoring, which is like, to me, it's not the wood autopilot that's the problem. It's you're monitoring, you're the pilot monitoring, the airplane's not going to see the flock of geese when it's on autopilot. Well, your Tesla's not going to see the box in the middle of the road on the freeway when it's on autopilot. So I think I'm a little more loosey-goosey on this stuff, but I also feel like, I see Waymo and they're improving so much. It drives better. These cars drive better than 90% of the people on the roads out there. And then every now and then it has an hallucination because it's a freaking AI. And it's like, I'm going to drive into the side of this car. And you're like, that was stupid, but it's never hit anything. My point is it eventually stops just in time. At least for me, it has been. But I've literally been on the wrong side of the street heading towards a bunch of parked cars. And Waymo suddenly realized and stopped and went like, that's not good. And then it like kind of hesitated for a while in the middle of the wrong side of the road with cars honking and stuff. But it's at city speeds. The worst it's going to be, it's not like it's going to go through a red light. I'm going to get T-boned, right? It's like I'm going to hit another car and it's going to be some paint job damage. And, I might.
Well, as we saw with Cruise.
Cruise also, Cruise was not doing it right.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
Like Cruise, I think, had a deficiency in the way they ran their operation across the board, including their messaging and PR.
Right.
You know,
But to counter your point about letting these companies test, I think that that's why we need some more rigid guardrails to prevent crews from doing what they were doing and what Uber was doing before. I forgot.
Oh my God!
Yeah,
Yeah,
Uber was doing a couple
it
of
was
years
Uber,
ago.
right in Phoenix, right, with the Volvo EX90.
Yeah.
Look, I'm just saying that like Waymo shows that we can get close, and it's getting better all the time. I don't think full autonomy is necessarily something we should go after. When I drove the Level 3 from Mercedes, I was kind of like, oh, from a technical point of view, this is brilliant. This is amazing.
Yeah.
They really thought of everything. But then it was like, it's 40 miles an hour. Like, who cares?
Yeah, I was more impressed by the Level 2 functionality.
Exactly. Once I started being pilot monitoring again, I was much more excited.
Now it's automatically passing cars. It's going as fast as you want to. And even like if you think about the BMW solution where it's going to be tracking your retina to do lane changes, I mean, stuff like that's really cool versus the Level 3 system that can only do 40 miles an hour.
Exactly. So the question is, how much should NHTSA interfere with the development of Level 2 Plus, which is what I call the auto lane change, where you're still monitoring, you're still in charge, you're still responsible?
Yeah.
Right? It's a tough one.
I think when it comes to ensuring that you are paying attention, that you are responsible, that's fine. But yeah, everything after that, I think is debatable. But I think that every manufacturer should be taking some reasonable precaution to make sure that you are actually paying attention. And Tesla historically has not.
Oh, no. They're terrible about it. They're very loosey-goosey. In fact, you can still buy on eBay these little electronic modules that like, did you read about that?
Super Cruise Buddy and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's so bad. Where it like makes wiggles the wheel, but virtually for you, right? Like and stuff like that.
It's like one of the old, they used to make a USB thing that would jiggle your mouse on your screen.
Sue the crap out of these people. If you want to be useful, this is one thing you should be doing. But look, I think, going back to the stuff to define the technology, for me, it's like, I feel like when I'm driving these vehicles, I mean, I think part of it is because I'm a nerd and techie, and part of it is because I'm a car journalist and I have access and I've driven these cars. But I think that I feel like I live in a complete parallel universe to the average person in a car out there. Like my experience is so radically different. It's so much. I'm living Futurama right now. Every time I get in an EV and in a car and I think that's part of the problem with the change that people are afraid of. I mean, I think.
Yeah. And I think that's part of the reason why so many people are so blown away by Teslas is because they haven't driven any other new car in 5 or 6 years. Their car's going to be 10 years old and they drive into Tesla and it feels like they've moved into another planet. Meanwhile, there's a lot of other cars that have similar technology out there now for that too. But they feel like, oh, this is wild. This is so different. And yeah, I think that the future is not widely distributed. Thank you. And that's very much true on the road.
Yeah, the EV future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. I've literally written that in an article before. But I think I want to find a way for us journalists and in general for us EV enthusiast advocates to educate people in a way, like right now, I don't feel like we're able to do a good job. There's something missing.
It really is. The experience is such a huge part of it, and without a test drive, you can't get that. I was a little bit frustrated. Porsche did the Macan EV launch recently, and they were talking about how driving is experiencing. So I asked their CEO, like, okay, so does that mean you're going to have more Macan EVs available at dealerships for people to drive? And they're like, no, we're going to sell everyone we're going to make. What are you talking about? We're not going to have demo cars available for people. Like, okay, how are you going to do the convincing then? So, I mean, Porsche's obviously is a limited case, but I really do feel like that's a huge part of it. And if you're someone who has got that innate dislike for that thing, you're not going to take the effort to go drive one of these, even if you can. That's unfortunate.
So, do you think we're going to get to a point where, first of all, do you think that the governments of the world, not just the US, but Europe and stuff, have been a little too overly optimistic with their deadlines on killing off the older tech, whatever that older tech might be, diesel, gas, hydrogen, whatever you want to call it? To me, hydrogen is a dead end, but like in terms of EV hydrogen, I mean, there's hydrogen combustion, this and other stuff. But do you feel that things are overly optimistic, or do you think that we're about to experience a reckoning with climate to the point where people are just going to have to, and the government's going to have to mandate?
No, I wish that were true. I do think, unfortunately, that the 2035 mandates that we're seeing in a lot of places are too optimistic. I do think that there will be some countries that draw the line and stick to it. Like France, probably Norway, Europe, California, maybe in the US. But I think by and large, we'll see companies backing off from that. And I think the General Motors move recently where they're kind of shying away from their Ultium technology and saying they're going to reintroduce hybrids into the U.S. market is kind of the first step.
But even Ford, right? Like they're decreasing their production on the F-150 Lightning, which is a brilliant vehicle.
While jacking up prices, unfortunately.
It's too expensive, and
it is now,
I don't like the steering because it feels like a truck, and that's not what I'm looking for. Because everything else feels like an EV, but the steering feels like a truck. But it's still a brilliant vehicle because it is an F-150. Other than towing, it can do everything an F-150 does. And you can use all the accessories of an F-150, like the caps for your bed, the freaking accessories.
If you want to actually use your truck as a contractor or something like that, it is a better truck than any other truck on the market right now. You can think of the money you could save on generator rentals and things like that. It would be an amazing solution, but a lot of people just don't want to even think about it. Yeah.
So, I mean, do you think so? Part of me, the cynical part of me says GM and Ford are doing this because they're like, you know, that narrative is out there of like EVs are failing, right? So they're like, well, you know, we have a profitable business. It's not the future, but we have this profitable business with internal combustion vehicles and hybrids that we could probably leverage. Part of it, me is saying that's kind of what's happening, but part of me is also like, you know, it's a business. It's the economics of it, right?
Yeah.
But don't you think that if they put all their effort into making a $25,000 EV, like the Bolt was, like whether it's Ford and forget Stellantis, they're lost, or GM, or even the Germans, like the ID2 All or whatever it was that I went to see in Germany last year, awesome. Like, do you think that if these cars were made and they were costing what they did and they brought that software-defined vehicle technology, trickle it down and still give us good performance and good experience, that people would jump ship faster? I mean, besides the EV9 and the third row SUVs and the pickup trucks that this market demands.
Yeah.
Do you think that would help?
Cost is definitely the number one concern that most people raise when it comes to making that switch to EVs. And I think that is definitely something that if we could get that out of the way, that would be a huge part of it. And then we could get the volume going. And then I would like to think that the charging issue would kind of take care of itself at that point, because you would have enough volume that it would be profitable enough endeavor that companies would actually be competing with each other rather than just existing in islands off of highways.
Like, I feel like access to supercharger network, no matter how it's executed, is going to be a net positive for EVs, right? Like, it's not necessarily going to be as slick as a Tesla experience, but it will definitely help everybody.
I think it will be in the long run.
And there's a danger, as you know, because it's like, as you said, they should spin it out. But even if they spun it out, you know, Elmo would want to own it somehow because he's a control freak. The last thing that, you know, I'm wondering about is, you know, to kind of wrap up this podcast, is I feel like we don't just have an infrastructure problem with charging. We have an infrastructure problem with car maintenance or service, car repair, body shops, car insurance around EVs. I feel like this negativity that we see in the media is influencing the people who have not experienced EVs that work in those fields and making it worse to own an EV because of it. And part of that is further accelerated and further made more difficult by gigacastings, for example.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
But inevitably, cars are going to use gigacasting. It's more cost effective. It's a better use of material and energy. It's faster, cheaper to make. And more importantly, you can optimize for safety better. Yes, the cars won't be as repairable. That is why we need better recycling infrastructure. That's why we, you know, to me, it's an infrastructure problem. Like, if we don't solve this infrastructure problem, Tim, my concern is that this vertical integration we're already seeing in China, like all the way, is going to happen with insurance, which is already happening, Tesla insurance. Is going to happen with body shop. Tesla is doing their own body repairs now. Service centers, obviously, everybody's got their own. That's fine. But dealers, that's another big deal. Like, dealers are a big deal. Dealers need to die. I'm sorry. Like, if you are an owner of a dealership, you're listening right now, and you're like, that's it, I'm never listening to you again, Miriam. It's not you specifically, but it's the entire industry. It's slowing down the process. I would not want to ever buy a car again that I can't buy like I buy an iPhone. Sorry. That's me. After my Tesla experience, it's been magnificent. And that's why I'm probably going to go to Polestar. Right now, I'd love to have an Ioniq 6N when they make it. I love the look of the car. I like the design. I think it's great. If it just needs to be a little faster and peppier for me. But overall, it's a pretty solid, choice for me. But then I think about the dealer experience, and I'm literally walking away from that thought.
Yeah. I mean, when we bought our BMW, it was a really nice experience. Our salesman was great and everything else, but it still took a long ass time. When we bought the Model Y, I configured it online. I got an email. I showed up. I scanned a QR code. I walked over to the car and I drove away. And it was amazing that I barely had to interact with anyone. And it was the same thing when we dropped it off after the lease was up. It was basically the same thing in reverse. That is absolutely the way that it should be, but sadly, I don't see our dealer laws changing in the U.S. anytime soon.
But what about this other part stuff? Do you think that we are pushing car manufacturers by not having the infrastructure for insurance, repair, maintenance, and sales, that we're pushing these manufacturers to go fully vertical? And that's not a good thing. I think ultimately choice is a good thing. The fact that I can pick my insurance company is a good thing.
Yeah, I think Tesla's a bit of a special case in that because insurance companies didn't want to touch them, and so they were kind of
They forced to.
I think that the gigacasting thing is interesting. I actually just did a piece it'll be in the next issue of Car and Driver. You can go check it out. A deep dive on gigacasting, and I talked to an analyst about that topic, and the response basically was when it comes to repairability cost, it's actually potentially going to be lower in gigacasting cars because they will, on average, have much better collision avoidance systems than older cars. So they'll be less likely to get into a crash. Now, if you have the similar crash, obviously the gigacasting cars are going to be more expensive, but it'll be less likely to crash. And so therefore, there won't necessarily be the insurance impact that you would expect. But I hope that we don't get to a point where we are forcing every manufacturer to have their own insurance thing. And we saw it before, like Care by Volvo, for example. That was what that was going to be.
Right, exactly.
And it failed.
Yeah.
So
I think it was true. It was like Nokia. The Nordic countries, they're ahead of their time, and then they don't know how to market this stuff. And then, Apple comes along and makes it happen.
It's really interesting how similar this is. And you and I, went through the rise of the smartphone boom, which is really fun to watch. And it's amazing how often I think back to that now in terms of the rise of EVs. Because
it's totally parallel.
It's like everyone's like, Toyota is dead because they didn't have EVs soon enough. But I'm like, this is like, we're barely in the Palm Pilot days of the EV, and Apple hadn't even come to the scene yet, realistically. I mean, and obviously things don't line up exactly, but the market is still 6% or 8% in the US. There's plenty of room. Everything's going to evolve in ways that we can't possibly imagine, just like the smartphone evolved in ways that we can't imagine.
The next disruption, if it happens, and it could happen, I think, is the Chinese EV makers, like Zeekr launches in the US, builds a plant in Mexico, and then with NAFTA, nobody can force them to stay out.
Yeah, actually, another piece of different car driver was on the ramifications of the UAW strike. And one of an analyst I spoke with there said that basically the UAW may have just shot itself in the foot.
Well, of course they have.
Because they have driven up the
cost. I'm pro-union, but of course they did.
Every car is going to be more expensive. Every U.S.-built car is going to be more expensive next year than it was this year, and that's opening the door just in time for the Chinese manufacturers to come in.
So that's my next prediction. I think that Tesla was the first disruptor, and the Chinese coming in some roundabout way are going to be the second disruptor.
Honestly, I'm really excited to see what it does to China.
I want it. I want the disruption, because when they make a $25,000 EV that is really compelling, that's like basically a Model 3 scaled down just a little bit with all the software-defined goodness and everything, and show the world how great that is, and then the traditional car makers are either going to have to throw that in the towel or follow suit. And Toyota and Volkswagen will follow suit, I'm sure.
Personally.
But Ford and GM, I want them to, but will they?
I want a $12,000 new pickup truck.
You know what? You want that Toyota pickup.
I want that Toyota truck. If you add on the extra costs we're going to need for some extra airbags and that kind of thing, $12,000-$15,000 pickup truck, that would be amazing.
I agree. I mean, there's a lot of things we want.
So many toys.
Oh man, I do. When I went to Germany to see the ID2 all launch, the CEO of North America, Pablo CD, I think is his name, I talked to him and I said, give me this, our model, all-wheel drive, 450 horsepower, 0-60 in 3.5 seconds. I will give you cash for it. And he's like, oh. And I'm like, yeah, well, that's what we want. That's what a lot of us want. Because, I've owned a Golf R, I loved it, but it's like a dinosaur in comparison to what you can do. But at the same time, as much as I like a Model 3, and I think a Model 3 Performance is the best EV value in terms of performance you can buy today, it's a big car. I want a small hatchback, but I want a CUV. I want a small hatchback. So that's kind of what I'm dreaming of. And then I'm also dreaming, and this is Kyle and I also kind of completely being crazy together. We did a show last year together. If you want to, I'll put in the show notes the episode number. But we've saying ID Buzz R camper.
Interesting.
Fender flares lowered. 3 to 3.5 to 16.
Interesting.
Big battery pack. Go crazy. Pop top.
Yeah.
Do donuts with the pop top open at the beach.
Very interesting.
I know it's never going to happen, but maybe one day we can 3D print our own cars and we can do that.
My Prius XL it's getting there. So yeah, just need a couple of those back to back, and or one of those rotary print beds kind of things. Maybe
So
then you could.
here we're talking about what's going to happen probably when I'm dead. 3D print your own car, if cars still exist by then. Because shouldn't we all be taking public transit? Tim?
That is ultimately the solution to all of our problems, but no one wants to talk about that.
But I
That's
want to
no
drive a
fun.
car, Tim.
Yeah, I know. Well,
You too, right?
nobody takes horses to work anymore, but they still go play with their horses on the weekends. So there you go.
Perfect.
It's fun.
All right. On that note, let's wrap up. Do you want to tell folks where they can find you on the internet, your various handles, and where you're right, like everywhere, like the most prolific freelance car journalist that I know.
Thank you very much. For only doing this for a little over a year, I very much appreciate that. Yeah, you can find me at timstevens.me. I'm Tim Stevens on most social platforms these days. And yeah, I've got a Substack, but I'm going to be moving that off of Substack as soon as I can find a platform that I can afford. Everything, unfortunately, costs a lot more on Substack, and I don't make any money off that thing. But I'll figure that out. So anyway, timstevens.me is a good place, and Tim Stevens on most of the socials.
I love your newsletter.
Thank you very much.
And I'm glad you're moving from Substack.
I'm trying to get there.
Okay, good. And folks, you know where to find me on the internet. I'm at Tankgirl. That's TNKGRL on most social media platforms. That includes Twitter. I will not call it the thing. Mostly Threads lately. I'm very active there. Of course, Instagram and Blue Sky, although I don't know, is that still a thing?
It's still.
I mean, I'm there, but I just don't feel like I have the traction. Thread's really working for me somehow. And then, of course, the podcast is at mobiletechpodcast.com. We're on all the big platforms, so subscribe and tell your friends. And then there's a YouTube channel, which is kind of like on the slow end of things right now. youtube.com/mobiletechpodcast. There's some unboxing videos and reviews and hands-ons and stuff. Check it out. And then, you know how YouTube works. Like, subscribe, tell your friends, click the bell, comment. If you want to comment about the podcast, do it on YouTube. It's fine. I'll read it and I'll respond. And then if you want to help me financially, patreon.com/tankgirl. That's patreon.com/TNKGRL. So the big thing is the video version. You get it a day or two in advance. And sometimes you get bloopers and sometimes you get like extra content. If I run over an hour or so, I generally I give you a little more and cut that out of the audio version. So you might get extra material and, you get to see our pretty faces. And
you get to see our matching Chuck Taylors too.
Oh my God, look at that. And then also, if it's a phone show, like if we're talking phones, that sometimes we brandish all the new toys. So if you want to see them like close up and personal, it's fun. So check that out. There's also other perks, access to our Discord and a bunch of things. So check that out. I'd love it if you could help me out. If you don't want to use Patreon, check out the links in the description. There is a link to a PayPal button you can use to buy me a coffee, like $5 coffee, because that's how much a coffee is in San Francisco, by the way. Help me out if you can. I appreciate it. And I also want to thank our sponsor, Mint Mobile. You know I review a lot of phones, so I'm constantly juggling multiple devices. While that's fun, it also means I'm spending a lot of money for wireless service on multiple SIMs. Thankfully, there's Mint Mobile, and that's who I'm teaming up with for today's podcast. If you want to save money on your wireless service, switch to Mint Mobile. You've probably seen the Mint Mobile ads featuring Ryan Reynolds, but let me quickly tell you how fantastic their service is, especially for tech-savvy early adopters like us. Mint Mobile offers premium wireless for as low as $15 a month, and you don't have to sacrifice any coverage, speed, or data. They're built on the nation's largest 5G network. They keep costs low because they sell direct to you online. They cut out the retail stores and salespeople. Why should you pay more than you have to for access to the same network? In my experience testing phones, Mint Mobile delivers the same data speeds and call quality as the big three for a fraction of the cost. Switching to Mint is super easy. Thanks to their eSIMs, you can sign up and activate immediately right on your phone from the comfort of your home. No more standing around waiting in line at a big wireless store. You can keep your current devices and phone number and easily switch services. And if your phone isn't eSIM compatible, Mint will ship you a new SIM card free of charge. The whole process only takes 15 minutes, and if you get stuck, Mint has a great customer service team to get you through it. All Mint Mobile plans include unlimited nationwide talk and text, plus lightning-fast 5G and free mobile hotspot. Mint will show you how much data you use each month and recommend plans that save you money. Mint also offers a modern family plan that lets you set up a super affordable family plan with as little as 2 lines. Use my link, mintmobile.com/mobiletech, to get premium wireless starting at $15 a month. Stop paying more than you need on your wireless bill and start saving big with Mint Mobile. And I want to thank you, Tim, for spontaneously at a hotel at a Mercedes event that we can't talk about coming to the podcast randomly. Thank you.
My pleasure.
All right. Folks, stay tuned. We'll have another show next week. And until then, cheers, everybody.
This has been the Mobile Tech Podcast with Tank Girl, proudly presented by worldpodcasts.com. You can visit us online at mobiletechpodcast.com.